books out today claim to expose some of the Vatican's most closely held secrets.
The Church has been caught in a lie, actually, in multiple lies. In today's video, I'll uncover the Bible that the Church doesn't want you to know about, expose a so-called holy festival that turned out to be a massive deception, and reveal the astonishing link between Jesus and Cleopatra. The Catholic Church is not a fan of this Bible. It's packed with stories of giants, fallen angels, apocalyptic catastrophes, terrifying visions of hell, and prophecies that the Church has labeled as heresy. By the time I finish unveiling the hidden truths within this ancient book, you'll understand exactly why the Vatican wants it buried. The Roman Catholic Church has one official Christian Bible. It combines the Old Testament and the New Testament, the Hebrew Bible and the Christian Gospel, merged into a single volume. But the Ethiopian Bible, also known as the Garima Bible, is much bigger. It contains 88 books, including the Old Testament, New Testament, Apocrypha, and Pseudepigrapha. And it's these last two that have made other Christians reject the Ethiopian Bible as a fraud. But why? The Apocrypha consists of Christian writings that outside of Ethiopia are not considered part of true scripture. But here's the strange part. They once were. Apocryphal texts originally held divine status in early Christianity. Over time, they were dismissed as uninspired, tolerated for a while, and then completely removed from the Church's teachings, except in Ethiopia, where they remained. Pseudepigrapha, however, is even more controversial. These writings are attributed to biblical patriarchs and prophets, yet they likely weren't actually written by them. The big problem with pseudepigraphal books is that the claimed author isn't the real author. Take the Book of Daniel, for example. It was written in the 2nd century BC, but the prophet Daniel lived about 400 years before that. The book presents itself as a first-hand account of Daniel's prophecies, but historically, that's impossible. And before you ask, yes, apocryphal texts can also be pseudepigraphal, and the Ethiopian Bible is packed with them. It includes books like The Ascension of Isaiah, which describes intense Jewish apocalyptic visions. The Book of Baruch is filled with vivid depictions of sin. Then there's The Shepherd of Hermas, a major Christian work from the 2nd century AD that the Church later banned for its radical stance on repentance and forgiveness. But wait, aren't those the very things the Church is supposed to stand for? Last, but by no means least, is the Book of Enoch, a text said to have been written by Noah's great-grandfather in the days before the Great Flood. Despite being banned from Christian Bibles, Enoch remains the most well-known of all apocryphal books. Even non-Christians and casual readers have heard of it. This ancient text provides a shocking backstory on why God decided to flood the world in the first place. If you're a regular on this channel, you already know the drill. The Book of Enoch dives deep into the origins of demons and the Nephilim. It tells the story of angels who were sent to watch over humanity but ended up falling from grace. And to put it bluntly, these fallen angels just couldn't keep their hands to themselves. They lusted after human women, resulting in the birth of unnatural beings, creatures God never intended to exist. These hybrid offspring were called the Nephilim. Their presence on earth was an abomination, and according to Enoch, the Great Flood was a moral necessity, God's way of wiping Nephilim out. The rebellious angels? They were cast into hell. The Nephilim? Completely destroyed. The book ends with a powerful prophecy foretelling a time when the Messiah will rule for 1,000 years. What do you think? Could that day be approaching? Now let's talk about something equally eerie: hunting witches in England. Witchfinder General might sound like a character class in a fantasy RPG, but in the 17th century, it was a horrifyingly real profession. Between 1645 and 1647, a man named Matthew Hopkins held the title and carried out one of the bloodiest witch hunts in England's history. This was one of the most paranoid times the country had ever seen. Civil war was tearing the nation apart. Religious conflict was at its peak, and economic hardship was pushing people to the brink. In that kind of chaos, fear of the unknown spreads like wildfire, and for many, that fear turned deadly. In 1620, a baby boy was born in the quiet village of Great Wenham. His name was Matthew, son of a strict Puritan minister. Little is known about his childhood, but he likely had a simple education before pursuing a career in law. Then, as a young man, his path took a dark turn. The first real records of Matthew Hopkins appear in 1644, when he moved to Essex and began what would become a notorious career, tracking down supposed witches. It all started with a whisper. Hopkins claimed he overheard local women talking about a recent meeting with the devil. That tiny spark ignited a wildfire. Soon he was investigating suspected witches in nearby villages, fueling paranoia wherever he went. He didn't just join the witch hunt. He led it, appointing himself Witchfinder General, a title he completely made up. Yet somehow, one man with a personal vendetta managed to terrorize half of England. Hopkins roamed from village to village, offering his services and cleansing communities of witches, most of whom were innocent women who ended up burned at the stake. And of course, Hopkins didn't do it for free. This so-called holy man was making a fortune. He charged villages hefty fees for every witch he rooted out. One of his most infamous contributions to the madness, the swimming test. You might have seen Monty Python poke fun at it in Search for the Holy Grail, but this was no joke. It was horrifyingly real. Women accused of witchcraft were bound with rope and tossed into water. If they floated, they were proven to be witches and sentenced to death. If they sank, they were innocent but drowned anyway. A cruel test with no way to win. One of Hopkins's biggest trials took place in Chelmsford, Essex, in 1645. 29 women were accused of witchcraft. Thanks to his so-called evidence, 15 of them were found guilty and hanged. Then came the witch trials at Bury St. Edmunds, where 16 women and 2 men were executed. Was there any justice? Usually not. But in this case, there was a little. Hopkins's downfall didn't happen overnight, but it did come. By 1646, his reputation started crumbling. A clergyman named John Gall began speaking out against him, and people started realizing the ugly truth. Hopkins was using religion as a business. He wasn't on a divine mission. He was just getting rich. But karma came knocking. Matthew Hopkins never got to enjoy the wealth he amassed from his witch hunts. In 1647, 2 years after the Chelmsford trials, he retired, and soon after, he contracted tuberculosis. He died a slow and miserable death. Some rumors claim he was subjected to his own swimming test, though most historians agree he simply wasted away. Either way, if you like your justice with a touch of poetic revenge, you can rest easy tonight. The royal bloodline of Jesus and Cleopatra. What do Jesus Christ, Cleopatra, and Julius Caesar have in common? Believe it or not, they're all connected by one tangled and dysfunctional family tree. The traditional story of Jesus, as told in the New Testament, might not be the full truth. And trust me, you won't believe the shocking twist in this tale. According to the Bible, Jesus was born in a stable, child of humble beginnings, raised by poor parents who would later become a great teacher, preacher, and leader. The Church tells us he was the Son of God, but historical evidence from the Gospels and the Jewish Talmud paints a different picture. Jesus' family wasn't poor at all. In fact, they were wealthy, educated, and powerful. They weren't the type to have a baby in a barn. They were part of Judea's elite society 2,000 years ago. The original accounts of Jesus' life may have been accurate, but over centuries, the Bible has been edited, translated, and altered. The story was shaped into something more relatable, something that would resonate with the common people, especially those living in poverty. Now let me ask you, what was Jesus' profession as a young man? A carpenter, right? Well, not quite. The Greek Bible refers to him as an Aaron, which translates to master mason. His work wasn't just simple woodwork, it leaned more toward the skilled craft of masonry. Some scholars even suggest that Jesus came from a wealthy background and was deeply involved in the Masonic traditions of Judea, making him one of the earliest known Freemasons. If your mind isn't already blown, hold on, because it's about to get even crazier. We've all heard about the 3 wise men who visited Jesus at birth. But what if they weren't just random travelers? These men were likely Persian magi, members of an elite priesthood. And despite common belief, Jesus was highly educated in a time when nearly 99% of the population was illiterate. He was connected with powerful figures like Zacharias and Nicodemus, both of whom were incredibly wealthy. He also had strong support from Joanna, the wife of King Herod's vizier. The ancient historian Josephus Flavius linked the biblical Jesus to a man named Jesus of Gamala. This Jesus wasn't just a spiritual figure. He was a governor, owned a fortress, and commanded a private militia of 600 men. Now let's revisit one of the most intense moments in the Bible, the birth of Jesus Christ. When word spread that Jesus was to be born, King Herod panicked. As ruler of Judah, he feared that Jesus would challenge his throne. So terrified was Herod that he ordered the mass killing of all male infants, hoping to eliminate any potential rival. Whether this event truly happened or is purely biblical legend, one thing is clear. Herod saw Jesus as a genuine threat. This fear reveals something that often gets overlooked. Jesus wasn't just a baby in a manger. He was a prince with real influence and a direct claim to the throne. When people call Jesus the King of the Jews, they mean it quite literally. His lineage was royal. Now let's piece this together. Jesus wasn't just a religious figure. He was a powerful prince from a distinguished family with strong political connections. His relatives were tied to Freemasonry, and he had links to Persian magi. He was highly educated, likely studying in Egypt, and according to historical accounts, his true name may have been Jesus of Gamala, a man with his own military force. If we follow this trail further, we come to an astonishing possibility. Jesus may have been an exiled prince of Egypt, possibly from the Ptolemaic dynasty. Cleopatra was the last ruling queen of that dynasty, and she had a son with Julius Caesar, Caesarion, born in 47 BC. But Caesar was assassinated, and Cleopatra and Mark Antony met their tragic ends in 30 BC. Caesarion, briefly pharaoh, was supposedly killed shortly after. But what if history isn't as airtight as we think? What if Caesarion survived? Modern detectives struggle to solve cases even a day old, yet we're expected to believe historians have all the answers about deaths that happened 2,000 years ago. Records show that in 4 AD, the very year Jesus was born, a mysterious wealthy Egyptian family was exiled and resettled in Judea. This family arrived with their remaining power, including 600 soldiers. That matches up perfectly with Josephus's description of Jesus of Gamala. Jesus was born about 30 years after Caesarean, making it possible that he was Cleopatra's grandson. His family may have sought to reclaim their throne, but instead, Jesus took a different path, one that would change the world forever. Stealing a human heart. Why would anybody steal an ancient human heart? It's a question I'd love to ask the people who did that very thing in Ireland. Thieves took the old wrinkled heart of an Irish saint, then gave it back 6 years later with no explanation. Lawrence O'Toole, a real Irish name, was the Archbishop of Dublin in the 12th century. He helped establish the Christian Church in Ireland, working closely with the Pope. He also survived a direct sword hit to the head when minions of the king tried to kill him during a mass. That's one of his many legends. Lawrence died on a mission to France and was canonized in 1225 as a saint. He had apparently performed many miracles in his life that earned him the position. Because he was deemed a saint, Lawrence's body was ripped into pieces, and those pieces were sent to various churches, as was Christian tradition. I know it sounds barbaric, but that's what Christians used to do. If you were a saint in the Middle Ages, you could expect someone to put your head, toenails, and hair clippings on display in a church. His head went to England, and his heart went to Ireland, where it found sanctuary at the Christ Church Cathedral in Dublin. The heart remained in the cathedral until 2012, when it was stolen. Somebody pulled off a heist. They stashed themselves inside the cathedral until it closed, then broke open the iron bars and took the heart. The thief left 2 peace candles burning on the altar and fled. The police never solved the crime. Then, in 2018, the 800-year-old heart was left in a city park and picked up by police. I wonder what the thief or thieves did to the heart over the 6 years they had it. Were they hoping it would be a good luck charm? But it turned out to bring such horrible luck that they gave it back. Do not go away, because something insane is going on right now in Jerusalem that you have to hear about. One of modern religion's greatest miracles has been denounced as a fraud. One man was nearly sent to jail for telling people about it. The Holy Fire scandal, exposing the truth behind the so-called miracle. The Holy Fire in Jerusalem, one of the most celebrated religious events, is nothing more than a staged trick, and now there might be solid proof to back up this shocking claim. A journalist who dared to expose the truth has found himself standing trial in a Greek courtroom. The Orthodox Patriarchate of Jerusalem took legal action against him. Wait a second, I thought the days of religious persecution were over. I thought the era of punishing people for questioning the church ended long ago, but apparently I was wrong. Somewhere, Galileo is probably rolling in his grave. Journalist Demetrius Alikakos has been accused of defamation for challenging the so-called miraculous nature of the Holy Fire ritual, and now he's paying the price. According to Orthodox tradition, the Holy Fire appears miraculously every year on the day before Orthodox Easter inside the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem's Old City. A small flame mysteriously ignites inside the tomb of Jesus Christ, rising from the marble slab that supposedly covers the place where his body was laid to rest. From there, the flame is passed from hand to hand and carried across the Christian world, just like the Olympic torch. The Church insists this flame is divine, appearing out of nowhere in Jesus' tomb. But Demetrius Alikakos exposed a different reality. In his recently published book, he revealed that this so-called miracle isn't divine at all. It's a staged illusion. Instead of appearing supernaturally, the fire is ignited by human hands. More specifically, by the Archbishop himself using nothing more than a lighter. He even claimed that both the current Archbishop Isidros and his predecessor, Archbishop Nikephoros, admitted it. The only difference, Nikephoros used matches instead of a lighter. And here's the kicker, these admissions were caught on video. The former Archbishop was recorded saying, "Miracles happen when God decides, not when we decide. Such miracles are performed by charlatans and magicians, not the church. Our faith cannot be based on scams." In other words, he openly admitted that the holy fire is a fraud. According to historical claims, the deception started centuries ago with Catholic crusaders and has been carefully upheld by the Orthodox Patriarchate ever since. The Church didn't take these revelations lightly. Furious over the exposure, they took legal action against Alikakos, charging him with defamation, breach of confidentiality, and violation of personal data laws. In simple terms, they're accusing him of recording and sharing evidence that proves the so-called miracle is fake. In a desperate move, the Church even tried to have YouTube take down the video proof. But ironically, their attempts to silence the truth only made the situation worse, because now, even more people are talking about it. It's like catching your parents red-handed on Christmas Eve, sneaking presents under the tree. The Church now faces a massive problem. The more people who start questioning this so-called miracle, the more people who start doubting everything else. If the holy fire is fake, what else has been fabricated? Is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre really the true burial place of Jesus? And then, people start asking the biggest question of all. Did Jesus even exist? The strange story behind Ouija boards. If you've ever wanted to reach out to a demonic spirit, you'd probably think of using a Ouija board. But here's something that might surprise you. The Ouija board wasn't always seen as evil. In fact, it has nothing to do with religion at all. It was never originally tied to the devil or the Catholic Church. Believe it or not, it started as a simple game in the 19th century, created by two spiritualist sisters in New York. The origins of the spiritualism movement trace back to Hydesville, where sisters Kate and Maggie Fox began hearing strange, unexplained noises in their home. They believed these noises were messages from spirits. When they asked questions, the so-called spirits responded by making more sounds. This eerie interaction launched the Fox sisters into the spotlight in 1848, turning them into overnight sensations. Spiritualism revolved entirely around communicating with the dead. It became incredibly popular, especially because so many lives were lost during the Civil War. Families, desperate to connect with their fallen loved ones, turned to people like Kate and Maggie, who claimed to have the ability to speak to the dead. Before long, others began claiming they had the same gift, calling themselves mediums. By 1893, spiritualism was recognized as an official religion. By 1897, the New York Times reported that it had an astonishing 8 million followers worldwide. Naturally, Christians associated spiritualism with witchcraft. They were the ones who transformed one of its key practices, known as alphabet calling, into something dark and sinister. Alphabet calling involved a medium reciting letters of the alphabet while waiting for a spirit to indicate a letter by knocking or making a sound. But this process was painfully slow, so people created an automatic writing board to speed things up. This early version of the Ouija board, also called a talking board, became incredibly popular. By 1886, it was all the rage as spiritualism reached its peak in the early 20th century. However, as the movement became flooded with frauds, automatic talking boards were soon seen as gateways to the underworld. Over time, Ouija boards moved away from spiritualism and became a simple parlor game, commonly played by college students. But in 1920, one professor made a shocking claim. He declared Ouija boards a national menace because so many students were allegedly using them to communicate with demons. The truth? Ouija boards were never inherently evil. It was Christians who painted them as tools of darkness, and Hollywood filmmakers only fueled that idea, turning them into the terrifying objects we know today. Holy tears or just bad plumbing? When a statue of Jesus Christ in a Mumbai church began shedding tears, locals believed they were witnessing a true miracle. The church was quickly becoming a pilgrimage site as word spread of the supernatural event. Then, out of nowhere, an amateur plumber showed up, and what he revealed changed everything. His discovery was so controversial that it forced him into exile in Finland. Sanal Idamaruku is a well-known atheist in India, famous for debunking religious myths. He's already highly unpopular among Indian Catholics due to his sharp criticism of Mother Teresa. But in Mumbai, he tackled something much bigger than he expected. When he arrived at the Church of Our Lady of Vankaneni to investigate the miraculous crying statue, he made a startling conclusion. It wasn't a miracle at all. The tears running down Jesus' face weren't divine. They were the result of faulty plumbing. A leak in the pipes caused water to flow in such a way that it looked like Jesus was weeping. This revelation sparked immediate outrage. The backlash was so intense that Sanal was charged with blasphemy and faced the possibility of 3 years in prison. But things escalated even further. He began receiving death threats, making it impossible for him to remain in India. Fearing for his safety, he fled the country and sought refuge in Finland, effectively exiling himself. Was this response justified? Should someone face exile for exposing a false miracle? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Where is Columbus's body right now? Where is the body of Christopher Columbus? If he was so important to history, shouldn't he have an epic tomb somewhere? It turns out no one knows where Columbus is buried. Christopher Columbus died on May 20th, 1506. He was only 54 years old at the time. His death had been a long while coming, though. Serious medical issues started to plague him upon his first return voyage from America. While on his way home, Columbus suffered an attack of gout. The gout went away, but not forever. Over the following years, Columbus suffered from multiple influenza outbreaks and fevers. He had eye hemorrhages that made him temporarily blind. He also had recurring gout. It kept coming back to haunt him. After Columbus returned from his fourth voyage to the New World in 1504, he never left Spain again. 2 years later, he died and was buried in the city of Valladolid. 3 years after that, his ashes were transferred to the convent at La Rabida near Seville. Then, his remains were relocated again to a nearby cathedral in 1513. In 1536, his son Diego took the ashes to the Dominican Republic. They were put in a cathedral in colonial Santo Domingo. They were moved to another church in Cuba in 1796, and then transferred back to the Cathedral of Seville in Spain. This seems to be where the trail ends. It's a bad end for the trail because nobody knows where the bones are now or the ashes. The Dominicans claim Columbus's remains are still somewhere in the Caribbean. However, the truth is that nobody knows because the bones moved way too many times. Columbus's remains could be scattered throughout a dozen churches in Europe and the New World. Jesus had a magic wand. The Bible tells us that Jesus performed miraculous feats, including raising the dead with just the sound of his voice. Intriguingly, a 4th century AD painting discovered in Rome's Via Anapo catacomb depicts Jesus holding what appears to be a magic wand. Could Christ have secretly been a wizard? Take a look at this ancient painting from the Biblical Archaeological Society. It was found in the Via Anapo catacomb in Rome. It seems to show Jesus with a magic wand in his hand. What wizarding school did he attend? Historians aren't convinced that Christ had real magic powers, but they do suspect early Christians viewed Jesus as a magician, a sorcerer, so to speak. His followers may have depicted him with a magic wand to explain the miracles he performed, like healing people, resurrecting the dead, and turning water into wine. Jesus Christ wasn't the first magician to use a wand. Did you know magic wands date back to the 9th century BC? Practitioners of the Zoroastrian religion in Iran used small rods during sacred rituals. Wands have been instruments of magic for at least 3,000 years. What happened to the Templars? To this day, the Freemasons believe the Knights Templar were destroyed for the secret knowledge they refused to give to the Church and the King of France. This mysterious wisdom had something to do with Solomon's Temple and ancient magic. Some say the Knights Templar were an organization of shadowy bankers who controlled the nobility of Europe through their impressive wealth. To others, they were brave knights who defended Christian pilgrims in the Holy Land and safeguarded the future of Europe. Others claimed the Knights Templar were heretics, devil worshippers who defied God. No one seems to agree on why the Templars were annihilated on Friday the 13th, 1307. But who were the Templars really? And is it true that they're still around right now? To understand, let's start at the beginning. In the year 1118, a French knight by the name of Hugues de Payens established a military order with 8 relatives and some of their friends. They called themselves the Poor Fellow Soldiers of Christ and the Temple of Solomon. Why create a band of knights, you ask? To protect Christian pilgrims journeying to Jerusalem. Christian armies had captured the Holy Land from the Muslims in 1099, but to reach Jerusalem, pilgrims had to travel through territories controlled by Muslims. The knights wanted to stop Christian travelers from being robbed and killed in enemy territory. By 1129, the Knights Templar were officially endorsed by the Catholic Church. 10 years later, Pope Innocent II granted the Knights Templar special privileges, like being exempt from taxes and given diplomatic immunity. Kind of like James Bond, the Templars were given a license to kill. They answered to no one but the Pope and God. The Pope never expected the Templars to turn to banking. With all of their diplomatic immunities and tax exemptions, they established a network of banks across Europe. Over the next century, the Templars amassed more money than the kings of the world were comfortable with. There was also some other weird stuff going on. Over the next century, the Knights Templar became famous for their rigid code of conduct. They weren't allowed to wear pointed shoes or kiss their mothers. You can read the hundreds of bizarre restrictions in the Rule of the Templars. I'm telling you, it's a real code book that they had to abide by. Do you think you would last in the Order of the Knights Templar? All members had to swear an oath of poverty and chastity, even though they were filthy rich. They weren't allowed to have any personal money, and they definitely weren't allowed to have girlfriends or casual relationships. Plus, don't forget, no pointy shoes. Do you still want to join the Templar Knights? A lot of people did because their numbers swelled and their organization grew in power. The Templars became Europe's greatest fighting force, slaying their enemies on the front lines of the Crusades. They built castles, won battles, and were regarded as fearless warriors. Only the good times didn't last. The Muslim armies retook Jerusalem in the late 12th century, and the Crusades were lost. In 1291, the last major Crusader foothold in the Holy Land was destroyed with the fall of Acre. In 1303, the Knights Templar were forced to establish their base of operations in Paris, right under the nose of the evil King Philip IV. Just 4 years after the Knights Templar got to Paris, King Philip had them all arrested on Friday, October 13th. Many knights were tortured until giving confessions of corruption and heresy. They admitted to being devil worshippers, but so would you if somebody was peeling off your fingernails in a rat-infested dungeon. In 1312, Pope Clement dissolved the order once and for all. Their immeasurable wealth was handed over to a rival order known as the Knights Hospitaller. That's what King Philip said, but most historians are pretty sure that Philip stole almost all the Templars' wealth for himself, except in England, where King Edward II seized all Templar assets that he could get his hands on. What if there's more to the story than we've been told? The Freemasons insist that the Templars weren't just abolished, they were silenced because they held explosive knowledge about Europe's true history. According to them, the Templars possessed secrets that could have shattered both the Catholic Church and the French monarchy. That's why King Philip and Pope Clement joined forces to wipe them out. Even today, many believe that a secret faction of the Knights Templar still exists, guarding their ancient knowledge. One of the most intriguing conspiracy theories suggests that the Templars safeguarded the bloodline of Jesus Christ. They've been secretly protecting his descendants for generations, waiting for the perfect moment for Christ's great-great-great-grandchildren to step forward. What do you think? Could the Templars still be out there, holding on to powerful secrets? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you enjoyed this, don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned for more mind-blowing videos from the channel.